Today we're going to review what you already learned in 7th grade about proportional relationships. We're going to look at how information in a table, in a graph, and in an equation can explain a problem that shows a proportional relationship. It tells us in this problem that Jackie completed a bike race across Iowa. The ride is called the Register's Annual Great Bike Ride Across Iowa. Jackie rode a total of 525 miles in 7 days. Again, it asks us to create a table, graph, and equation for this problem. We'll have to determine the independent and dependent variables and calculate the unit rate. So if we start with the table, we see that the independent variable is always the x, and it's the first column. It's the input. And the dependent variable is always the second column. It's the y, and it's the output. So in this problem, the distance depends on the time that she travels. So we'll see that the distance in miles is going to be our dependent variable. Since it's the dependent variable, we're also going to see that it is on the y-axis. So we see that the distance in miles is right here on the y-axis. And then the time in days is the x-axis. So we'll see the time in days over here on the x-axis of the graph. So the distance depends on how many days she travels. But the question is, obviously, if she rides her bike for 0 days, she's traveled 0 miles. But what if she rode her bike for 1 day? So we need to figure out the unit rate, unit meaning 1. Well, if we take 525 miles and we divide it by 7 days, we'll see that that's 75 miles per day. So if she traveled 2 days and she's traveling at a constant rate of speed, well, 2 times 75 the first day and 75 miles the second day, is 150 miles. So if she travels 3 days, 3 times 75 is 225. So we'll see that the constant rate of change is 75 miles per day. So 4 times 75 is 300. In 4 days, she would travel 300 miles. So in 5 days, 5 times 75 is 375. If she traveled 6 days, add another 75 miles, or 6 times 75 is 450. And on the 7th day, we'd see that she traveled a total of 525 miles. So the constant rate of change is 75. So if we were to write an equation for any number of days, we would be looking at y equaling y. Remember, y is the dependent variable. It's talking about the distance in miles. Her total distance is equal to 75 miles per day. So we would write that as y equals 75x. Now you should recognize this equation from 7th grade where you talked about y equals kx. Whatever the dependent variable is going to be equal to whatever the constant of proportionality is times x, whatever the unit is. So y equals kx is the equation for a proportional relationship. To put this onto the graph now, we can graph these points. Remember that these are ordered pairs. So this is 1, 75, which means we go across the x, 1, and then we go up to 75. And we would put that point right, not there. We would see that if we went across 1 and up 75, it would be right here. So if we went across 2 and up 150, we would be right here. Here's another ordered pair, 3, 225, across 3, up to 225. And you should notice that we're climbing at a constant rate. And maybe you can even see, 4 and 300. You can see the slope of the line is rising 75 for every 1 day. So we're going up 75 miles and over 1 for 1 day. We go up another 75 miles and over 1 for day 2, right? Because we're adding a day. 75 miles per day. So we can see that our rate of change is 75 miles per 1 day. That's called our slope, right? So if we draw a line connecting these points, we can see that there's a constant rate of change that will create a line. Now, the first question asks, how can you determine the constant of proportionality, which is also known as the unit rate, which is also identified by the variable k. K is the constant of proportionality. So it's asking, how can we find the constant of proportionality from a verbal description, from a table, from a graph, and from an equation? So if we were looking at a verbal description, we would know that we're looking at the total miles divided by the number of days. So in this case, we took the 525 and divided it by the 7 days, and that gave us what the constant of proportionality is, which, if you recall, it was 75 miles per 1 day. So if we looked at the table, we're looking for where the 1 is the independent variable, where the x is, right? So we see that, let me get a highlighter, we see that right here, that we have 75 miles per 1 day. So we're looking to see where the independent variable equals 1. We're looking to see where the independent variable known as x is equal to 1, because that's the unit rate, unit meaning 1. Now, if it also asks, what if we were looking at a graph? Well, on a graph, we're looking for wherever it equals 1. We're looking at a unit rate, the x, as 1. And when we do that, we can see it's right here at 75. So we can look at the days for 1, and we'll see that the distance is 75. And that's how we know that it's 75 miles per 1 day. And in the equation, it's always, if we look at the equation as y equals kx, it's always k. It's the number with x. So we'll see that it's y equals 75x. So we know that it has to be 75. That is the constant of proportionality, or the unit rate, 75 over 1, or 75. So there's a bunch more questions here for you to answer, and you'll see that you should work through them and try and answer them, and then you can always check your answers with the answer key that's been provided. Hope that was helpful.